Parents claim to be broke and bankrupt to send me to college but turn around and invest that money into sisters' lifestyle as she promised them that she'd return it 10x after she makes it as a social media influencer. But oh boy, I never knew karma could hit someone so hard because screw funding my sister, they can't even fund groceries for the month and won't stop blowing up my phone. Hey, I've never posted here before, but I've been going back and forth on this for a while now, so I figured I'd give it a shot and get some outside perspective. Growing up, my parents always favored my younger sister. I mean, it wasn't extreme or anything, but it was obvious she's the baby of the family, and I guess I understood why I was the older kid, and I didn't mind. I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. I got it. She was younger, so she was babied, and I was older, so I had more independence. I figured it was just part of being the oldest sibling. One thing my parents always promised me though was that they'd help me with paying for college. I did pretty well in school and worked hard to get accepted into a decent college. It wasn't the cheapest, but it was my best option for the career path I wanted to follow. I also figured that my parents would be there to help me out with the tuition just like they promised. Well, I was wrong. I didn't find out until after I accepted the offer that my parents were too broke to pay for my tuition. They told me all about their financial struggles right after they watched me send in the acceptance letter. I was obviously heartbroken. I felt completely betrayed, to be honest. I had spent months planning my future, and suddenly I was left scrambling. I figured they would come through for me like they always said they would, but they didn't. I had to figure everything out on my own. I got a job, multiple jobs actually, and took out loans to cover tuition and living expenses. It wasn't easy, but I made it work. I worked long hours, stayed up late studying, and felt the weight of debt growing every day. I kept telling myself that I'd get through it because that's what you do when you're in college, right? Everyone's broke and I'm not the first to struggle this much for a degree. But things didn't get better with my parents. Not long after I started school, I found out that they had actually taken out a loan themselves, and they didn't use it for my education. They gave it to my sister. My sister had zero interest in college and instead had this crazy dream of becoming a social media influencer. At first, I didn't know what to think. When I found out, it wasn't like they straight up told me. I only found out about it when I visited home over the holidays. I noticed all these expensive things piling up in my sister's room. A brand new camera, fancy lights, some ridiculous wardrobe that looked like it came straight out of a high-end store. I asked my mom about it, and she casually mentioned that they had taken out a loan to support my sister's influencer journey. Apparently, she promised them that once she made it big, she'd pay them back tenfold. I was furious. I couldn't believe they would take out a loan for her dream while I was stuck working part-time jobs just to get through school. In my head, it was clear what my parents valued more, or rather who they valued more. They'd much rather flush their money down the drain than support me in getting a degree. I'm not trying to say that my sister wasn't doing any work, but if I'm being very honest, I went through her page and there was barely any content on there. The little content that was there, you could tell that she barely put in any effort. The only thing she'd do was go out and buy expensive clothes and take photo shoots in an attempt to get big, but she wasn't even close to hitting any big numbers on social media. I felt like I was watching them waste money on something so reckless, and it was at the expense of my education. Fast forward a couple of years and nothing had really changed. My sister was still stuck in the same spot, posting selfies and buying more expensive gadgets but not making any real money. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation had gotten way worse. They were constantly talking about how broke they were, how they were struggling to make ends meet, and how they couldn't afford basic necessities. And it was also frustrating because they had money, but they just chose to invest it into something that was never going to pay off. I started getting texts from them asking for help. At first, I was sympathetic. I felt bad for them, and after all, they were my parents. I helped them out for the first couple of months and sent them what I could, but it didn't take long before I realized something wasn't right. They kept asking for money, but it became clear that it wasn't just for bills or groceries. They were sending that money to my sister. I don't know exactly how much, but it was enough to cover her shopping sprees and more of her content creation budget. Meanwhile, I was paying off student loans and barely scraping by, so I stopped helping. I felt like I had done my part and I wasn't going to keep supporting a lifestyle that I thought was irresponsible. But I didn't just stop sending money. I also stopped responding to their calls and texts. Honestly, I was done. Then a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend about all of this. I was venting about how my parents had prioritized my sister's influencer dream over my education and how they were still asking me for money despite their poor decisions. My friend said I was being cruel to my parents, that I was holding an unnecessary grudge and that I should just forgive them. They told me that family should come first and that I was being too harsh. I thought about it for a while. My friend's words stuck with me, but then I remembered all the sacrifices I made to get through college. I'm still paying off my debts. I can't afford to help them out even if I wanted to. I have my own life to figure out. and I'm not in a position to keep supporting my parents, especially when they've made such bad choices. So now I'm asking AITA for refusing to help my parents after they lied to me about being broke and used that money to fund my sister's influencer dream? I just don't know anymore. Update 1. Hey, everyone, thanks for all the responses. I didn't expect my post to blow up, and honestly, reading your comments gave me a lot to think about. A few people asked questions that I wanted to answer before I got into the update. Some of you asked if my parents actually promised to pay for my college or if it was just implied. To clarify, they outright said that they'd help with tuition since I was a kid. I was pretty open with them initially about how I felt like they didn't pay me much attention and that they always spoiled my sister and never me. They always told me that they knew I had far more potential and that they were simply saving their resources to make sure that I was able to live up to that potential. They always encouraged me to study hard and aim for a good score. They even helped me pick the college I ended up going to while knowing it was more expensive. So yes, there were promises. It wasn't just something I assumed. Others asked if I have tried to sit down and talk this out with them. In the beginning, I did try. I was hurt and I wanted to understand why they would do this. They brushed it off and said that they helped me in other ways by giving me a roof over my head, clothes on my back, and food in my stomach. I could tell they didn't see it as a big deal because they thought that they did everything that a parent was supposed to do. Against most of the advice I got in the comments, I decided to visit my parents one last time. A few people told me I should just cut my losses, but curiosity and a little pity got the better of me. I kept wondering if maybe they were genuinely struggling and had realized their mistakes. I thought maybe seeing the situation firsthand would help me make peace with everything. So I showed up at my old home. I barely recognized it. The place looked like it had been stripped of anything comfortable. I mean, growing up, we didn't have much, but it was still homey. Now it just felt empty, almost bare. The furniture was old and worn down like it hadn't been replaced in years. I noticed that some of the lights were off probably because they couldn't afford to keep them on. Then there was the food situation. When I got there, my mom and dad were busy doing something, and they asked me to grab a snack from the kitchen. When I opened the fridge, I could barely believe what I saw, or rather didn't see. There was hardly anything in there, mostly cheap bulk food, pasta, canned soup, bread, definitely not enough to sustain anyone long term. My parents were usually big on eating healthy and organic food, so to see so much processed and frozen food in the house kind of shook me to my core. It hit me how bad things must be for them if they couldn't even afford the groceries they usually got. During my visit, my parents kept talking about how hard things were for them. They insisted that they'd always done their best for me and that now as their kid, it was my turn to step up and help them. They didn't apologize or admit that maybe they'd made mistakes. Instead, they turned the blame on me and said that I should feel responsible for their struggles now that I'm earning a decent income after graduating. My sister was there too and she was as entitled as ever. She acted like I was the bad guy for not helping out. She went on and on about how she was almost there with her influencer career. She kept saying that if I had any loyalty to the family I would help her out so she could finally make it big. She didn't seem to realize how out of touch she sounded, especially considering everything our parents had already poured into her career. It was like she didn't grasp how much they'd sacrificed for her and for what? A life of misery? At one point I asked about their financial situation and that's when I realized just how bad things had gotten. My parents had taken out multiple loans on top of the one they used to support my sister. Their credit was ruined and they were so deep in debt that they couldn't even cover the basics anymore. They couldn't pay the bills. They were barely getting by on the little money they had left, and they were depending on my sister who still believed that one viral post would fix everything. On one hand, I felt pity. Seeing my parents like this, struggling and barely scraping by, was hard to watch. Despite everything, they're still my family, and I hated seeing them in such a desperate situation. But on the other hand, I felt this overwhelming frustration and disappointment. They'd made their choices and now they were facing the consequences. It was tough to feel completely sorry for them when they were so unapologetic about everything they'd done to me. The worst part was that they didn't see any of this as their fault. They acted like they'd done everything they could for both of us, but that was far from true. I had sacrificed so much to get through college and they still didn't get it. They kept pushing this idea that I was selfish for not sharing my income with them now that I was doing okay. They even tried to make me feel guilty for abandoning them during a time when they needed family the most. My sister kept chiming in saying that if I truly cared about them, I wouldn't have hesitated to support them financially. She just couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping at the chance to help, like it was an obvious obligation on my part. Every time I tried reasoning with her, she'd cut me off and start ranting about how I was always a horrible brother for never supporting her. After hearing them out, I couldn't take it anymore. I left feeling more hurt and angry than ever. I thought maybe seeing them like this would give me some closure or at least make me feel some kind of sympathy. But instead, it only made me realize that they're never going to see things from my perspective. They don't see the sacrifices I made, and they don't understand the resentment I feel. All they see is the money they think I owe them, and they're willing to guilt-trip me into giving it to them. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. I had wanted to believe that maybe they regretted their decisions, that maybe they were sorry, but they weren't. They had made their bed and now they were lying in it. The whole thing was just sad. Sad that they chose to invest in a dream that had no real foundation. Sad that they couldn't see how much they'd hurt me, and sad that they were now facing the reality of those choices. Since that visit, I've been getting even more messages from them. They keep saying how they're in dire need and can't pay their bills. They've hinted at needing help with bills and groceries again. I've been ignoring most of their texts, but it's tough. Part of me feels a sense of duty as their kid, but at the same time I can't just forget how they treated me. I talked to a couple of friends about it again and they're pretty split. Some agree that my parents have made horrible choices and it's not my job to save them from their mistakes. Others say I should let it go and help them out a little even if it's just for necessities. I'm honestly torn. I know they're struggling, but I also know they put themselves in this position, not to mention they still refuse to correct my sister's behavior. They've not asked her to get her act together even once. They refuse to see the fact that my sister is the reason that they're struggling. I know I didn't point it out to them when I spoke to them, but I also know that if I did, I would probably get a lot of heat for saying something like that. One thing's for sure, I'm not supporting them. I don't know if I can support people who don't even see why they're in this mess in the first place. Update 2. Hey everyone. It's been a while since my last update, about 3 months actually. A lot has happened and I've got some good news to share with you all. First, the good news. I've been offered a promotion at work. I was pretty surprised by it, but I'm excited. The opportunity is with the overseas branch of my company, and it's a big step forward in my career. I've been thinking about it a lot and I'm seriously considering taking the position. The pay is great and it's a chance for me to get some international experience. Honestly, it's the kind of opportunity I've been working for ever since I graduated. So, yeah, things are going well on my end until my parents showed up unannounced at my place. I still have no idea how they found out where I live. Last I checked, I hadn't shared my address with them, especially since they've been so out of touch over the last few months, but there they were at my door. At first, I figured they were just trying to check in or maybe ask how I was doing, but no, they came in with a mission. Right away my mom started talking about how they were behind on their bills and had some utilities that were about to be shut off. They were begging me for money, and they said that they needed it by the end of the week or else they'd be in serious trouble. I don't even know how they thought I would just drop everything to help them. I got so mad like I didn't even know how to react at first. After everything they've done, after the way they've treated me, they thought I was just going to hand over money to bail them out. There was no way that I was going to do that. I told them flat out that I wasn't going to help. Not only did they refuse to admit the fact that they were the reason for their misery, but they also refused to acknowledge the mistakes they made when it came to my education, and they still had the audacity to ask me to take care of their problems. It quickly turned into a huge argument. My mom and dad were blaming me for holding on to petty things from the past instead of helping them out when they were in need. They kept saying how family helps family and I shouldn't hold grudges. I tried to explain that I wasn't holding on to anything petty. I was just being smart with my money because I'm still paying off student loans and working hard to build my life. They refused to listen to that. I then reminded them that I did help out briefly initially, but they ended up giving that money to my sister who was the very reason that they were in this mess to begin with. But they couldn't understand that. They didn't seem to care that I'd been financially responsible. It was all about them and what they needed. It was like everything I had worked for didn't matter because they wanted me to drop it all for their emergency. It just made me so mad. The hypocrisy was unreal. They had no right to guilt-trip me into helping when they were the ones who made their own mess, but it didn't stop there. In the middle of the argument, I accidentally blurted out that I had been offered a job abroad. The moment those words left my mouth, the reaction was explosive. My dad's face went red. My mom started tearing up. They both started yelling at me. They said that I was abandoning the family when they needed me most. It was like all their previous anger over money and bills disappeared for a second, and suddenly, I was the bad guy for trying to better my life. My dad kept asking me why I couldn't just stay and help them out. He went off about how family comes first and how I couldn't just leave them in this mess. It was honestly insane. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to tell them that I had to think about my future too, that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness and success just to support them. But they kept screaming about how they were my family, and I was abandoning them. Eventually, my dad calmed down and told me he was proud of me for getting a job abroad. That honestly threw me off. It was a sudden switch in his behavior, and even my mom looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Just as I was about to thank him for his compliment, he asked me how much of my new pay I was going to send them. I think I lost my mind at that point. I told them I didn't owe them anything and every success I had was because of my hard work and not because of them. They tried to play the "I gave you a roof over your head" card, but I told them that I wasn't going to applaud them for doing their job as parents. Eventually, things got out of hand. They refused to leave, and I was seriously getting freaked out, so I had to threaten to call the cops. I was done trying to reason with them, and it seemed like that was the only way they'd leave me alone. Finally, after a lot of back and forth, they did leave, but not before they made me feel like the worst person in the world. They kept calling me selfish and heartless on their way out. It was honestly exhausting. Now I'm just trying to figure out what to do. The job abroad is a huge opportunity, but I'm feeling the pressure. I've been getting more texts from my parents still asking for money, but I'm at my breaking point. They haven't once apologized for what they've done, and I just don't know if I can keep dealing with them. I don't know if I'm wrong for wanting to take the job and not helping them anymore. I've worked hard for everything I've achieved, and at this point, it feels like they just want to keep draining me. I'm asking myself if I'm doing the right thing by putting myself first. Anyway, that's where I'm at now. I'll update again if anything changes, but for now, I'm stuck in this weird limbo. Update 3. Hey, everyone. It's been about 7 months since my last update and a lot has changed. So many of you gave me great advice and support that helped me get through some tough times, and I wanted to share what's happened since then. First of all, I have some good news. I took the job offer abroad. Moving to a new country felt like a huge risk, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. My new role has been challenging but rewarding, and I'm finally starting to feel I'm building the life I always dreamed of. It's honestly a relief to wake up without constant stress weighing me down. For the first time in years, I feel genuinely happy and excited about what's ahead. Before I took the job, things got even messier with my family. When my parents heard I was serious about leaving, they went into overdrive trying to guilt-trip me into staying. They started showing up at my place more often and in general pulled every trick they could think of to keep me from leaving. My mom would call and beg me to stay. She would also say that I was abandoning the family in their worst moment, and my dad just kept hammering on how selfish I was being. They even tried to get a few relatives to call me and tell me how much my parents needed me. It was exhausting and, honestly, a little heartbreaking to see how far they would go. The final straw, though, was when they tried to manipulate me with some very personal family things that I won't go into here. They tried to get me to feel responsible for problems that were never mine to begin with, and that's when I finally had enough. I decided to accept the job and fast-track all the paperwork so I could move out as soon as possible. I realized if I didn't take a stand now, I'd always be stuck dealing with their mess. Since I left, I've pretty much cut off any financial support and have gone very low contact with my family. I thought that might feel harsh, but in reality, it's been the most liberating choice. Life is simpler now. I get to focus on my job, meet new people, and just enjoy things without always worrying about who's going to show up next asking for money. But despite the distance, I still hear bits and pieces about what's going on back home. A mutual friend of ours recently told me that things have only gotten worse for my parents. Their financial situation has finally reached rock bottom. The bank is foreclosing my childhood home because my parents fell too far behind on the mortgage payments. They've already sold most of their stuff, and it sounds like they have nowhere else to go. They reached out to other family members, but no one was willing to take them in after seeing how they handled things with me. It seems like my parents finally pushed everyone away. As for my sister, she's still out there trying to make her influencer career happen. I heard she's been posting almost non-stop because she still believes that her big break is just around the corner, but it doesn't seem like she's made any progress. It's been sad, really. She's basically living out of her car now. She's still holding on to the idea that fame is right around the corner, even though there's no sign of that happening. I never wished any of this on her, but she chose to keep chasing that influencer dream instead of getting a stable job even when she had a roof over her head. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel bad for my parents and sister. No one deserves to end up like that, and despite everything, they're still my family, but at the same time they made their bed. They're the ones who chose to prioritize my sister's dreams over my education and to drain all their resources instead of investing in a secure future. I tried to help as much as I could, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being to support choices that weren't mine. It's a strange kind of peace knowing I finally stood up for myself and put my own needs first. I'm grateful to all of you who commented and gave me advice. I think without the encouragement I got here, I might have kept letting my family guilt me into staying. So thank you for helping me see things clearly and for giving me the courage to break free. For now, I'm moving forward and focusing on the new life I've started here. I don't know if I'll ever be fully at peace with how things ended up, but at least I can finally breathe and just live my life on my own terms.